cover everywhere. So there are things you can learn from there, such as their emphasis on diagnostic treatments, such as their cottage hospital system. Likewise with crime, do you want the American criminal justice system? Well, no, I don't want death penalty. I don't want to Guantanamo Bay, I don't want to see a racist system as bad as there, where 1 in 10 black men under the age of 34 are in prison. But there is something remarkable happening there, something absolutely amazing happening, which yes, I do want to see, and I think we should report, and we should learn from it. It's happening again in Texas. It began in Texas in 2007, when they decided we can't keep building more prisons. They have to spend another £2.5 billion on 17,000 prison places. And they just said, this is mad, we can't go on, what do we do? They appointed an old one who's a Tea Party Republican, a fan of George Bush, and probably pretty much everything that most people in this room would not be a fan of, should we say. And this guy, luckily wasn't a lawyer, he was an engineer. He said, well, how do we fix this prison? He began to look at it, he knew nothing about it. And he then got together with his Democrat partner on the other side, and they came up with something utterly remarkable, which is now spreading and led by the most hardcore Republicans in the States. It's led by people like Newt Gingrich, like Pat Boland, like Jeb Bush, like Bobby Jindal, and by the Texan Republicans and people. And that's because they decided that people on the left, the Democrats, had always seen that prison didn't work, that it was stupid to keep locking up the same people, to lock them up for such long periods of time. People on the right had this tenacity moment when they suddenly saw in Texas that prison is a sign of state failure. And they took the language of the right and applied it to the criminal justice system. And they said it's a waste of money, it doesn't work, and why are we locking up all these people? We should save money and do it in a way that actually works. So they took half the money they were going to spend on those new prisons and they put it into the probation service. And they said to the probation service, spend the money if you want, expand it, do it evidence-based, and let's upgrade the system. So they started spreading the use of drug courts, of mental health courts, of veteran courts, of special systems for women, substance abuse stuff. They put people through it. It's tough love. If you go into that system, if you screw up, you can fall off the wagon a couple of times, but if you don't play ball, you go back to jail, you have one of those horrific jail sentences that last forever. But if you do play ball, you get help with your housing, you get help with your education, you get help with your family and things like this. And the experiment's been remarkable, because what happens if you start treating people as human beings, if you start trying to treat their core problems which lead to them committing crime, whether it's family background, mental health, substance abuse, well, of course, you get them out of the system. You get them off the bandwagon of committing more crime, going to prison, committing more crime, going to prison. If you solve the problems, they become what the Republicans would see as what better members of society. The results are remarkable. Texas crime rates are falling faster than pretty much anywhere in the States. They're closing prisons. In one place I went to, Travis County, the syphilis rate for low-risk offenders, and they're using much better scientific methods of who is low and high risk, has fallen from 26% to 1% in 1 year to that sort of rate. And that's why everyone else is mimicking it. And so, in a very brief way, it's beginning to scratch the surface. Still, of course, they lock up obscene amounts of people. Still, of course, they have the death penalty. But it's a little crack in the system. What's so interesting is that the most toxic political debate there, which was criminal justice ever since the time of Michael Dukakis being ruined by his presidential rival, the toxicity has come out of this, and suddenly, left and right, workers was the same cause. They have different motivations. One side is about what the right would see as support for the victim, the other side is about finance. It doesn't matter. They're not tinkering with the length of jail sentence, with the length of sentencing, they're not tinkering with laws, they're not tinkering with drug policies, which combine so much of it, but they're just found common ground in the middle, and the net result is a start of improving the criminal justice system. And it is only the start, it's very early level, but it is something quite remarkable, it's something I would like to see imported here, which is to have a sensible evidence-based discussion on crime, and to do it on the basis of trying to get people to stop committing crime, rather than just trying to win the headlines.
You can't be exclusively. His career was ruined by championing Willie Morton.
Yes. And ever since then, every Republican saw the way to destroy Democratic Republicans to get them solving the crime. And of course, that's what we've seen here in the government whose biggest failure, I think, after Iraq was their insane policy on criminal justice. We just
rebalancing criminal justice.
You couldn't do it like that. And
they did.
It's going to continue. So yeah.
Right. Oh, well, look, I'm going to stand up and say I've been sitting down all day. I had this totally wrong because Ian and I thought this was a debate about who was worst dressed here. We were going to have a vote, and I was silly.
Well, you won, yeah.
I always win. Look, I speak, I think he's the only American on the line here. I'm half American, so I get to apologize for that. But I've written a book about the tragedies of the American judicial system, which I don't want you to buy. I want you to steal from the local bookshop for the justice. Because it's rather a big subject, and criticizing the American system takes hundreds and hundreds of pages. But what I want to talk about, I do want to talk about the positives. I didn't realize there were two sides of this debate, but I want to talk about the things we can learn from America, because that's actually much more interesting. We in Britain tend to learn the worst things and copy them, and there are some very positive things. The first thing we can learn, for example, which I have a whole chapter on in this book, is about juries. And I'm going to pick on you in a minute, so be ready. You know, we in America can talk to juries, both before the trial and after the trial, and we get to learn what really happened. You'll forgive me if I say, I think the British system is utterly ludicrous that you can't. So you live in this fantasy world that everyone's behaving terribly well, and they're not. Trust me, I've talked to a bunch of your jurors who violate the, you know, they'd be held in contempt like a good judge over there.
No, you can't do good thing jury research.
Research, but anyway, look.
On the basis that you don't actually ask them how they arrive at their
Exactly, which is just
that fix.
which is what you kind of want to know. Let me ask you this. If you were judging someone, because I think we have, you know, we talk about all these things that seem grand and big, but we miss the width of the treaty. I want you people to tell me what you mean by beyond reasonable doubt, which is a question they won't let you ask even, you know, right here in America. When you're judging someone in a criminal trial, how sure do you have to be that they're guilty? Do you have to be 50% sure, 70% sure, 75%, 90%, 95%? Who votes 80% sure? Put your hand. You're going to have to vote, so I'm looking at you. If you don't vote one way or the other, I come and slap you. Because I am American, I've learned about torture. Who votes 90% sure? You've got to be 90% sure. All right, 4 of you, and you got that way. All right, 90% sure. 95%. All right, we're getting a few more. 99%. Is there no one below 90%? Because, you know, I did this to a bunch of judges in America, and they averaged 83%. Anyway, look, the thing about this is actually, I have to disagree with you. There are 6 million Americans who are facing the judicial system at the moment. It's far more than they advertise here. If you are aiming 90%, you're aiming to get 600,000 innocent people in prison. That's what you're aiming for. People who aim low miss. And, you know, one of the fascinating things about our whole judicial process is we don't allow people to talk meaningfully about how they're making decisions. And it's no surprise that they make so many mistakes. And yet some of the things we focus on in terms of mistakes, I think, are just the wrong thing. We can learn from the Americans in terms of vast analysis of truth. The second thing we can learn from Americans is constitutions, about exalting the law above Margaret Thatcher, is the way I like to view it. You know, I would come back to this country when I was doing death penalty cases in America for years, and I would talk to these bizarre British lawyers who think that parliamentary supremacy is something sane. And it's not. You know, one of the beauties of America is a constitution where we preserve the rights of the individual, who are, after all, the people who need their rights preserved, against the whims of politicians. And the idea that this country doesn't take constitutional rights seriously is bizarre. It's very wide. The next thing that the Americans have, my wife is setting up, I'm here tonight because my wife bullied me, frankly. And she's setting up a charity in this country to do innocence project work. She ran an innocence project in North End. And, you know, all the stories that the British have are so pathetic compared to the stories we have in America about we do things the real American way. You know, they complain about what they do on legal aid. I got paid $1,000 to do a capital trial, and I did a little over 1,000 hours. We sued them under the federal minimum wage law, saying they should pay us $5 an hour, at least then we'd get as much as McDonald's. But, you know, one of the other, sorry, we did win. Yeah, they gave us minimum wage. Fantastic. There's the supremacy clause of the US Constitution. Yeah, so do I, a bunch of sociopaths. I say that in jest. Perhaps there was a study in California that showed 3 groups of sociopaths in America: doctors, lawyers, and mass murderers. And there's a reason for that I won't go into. Investigation. I don't understand this country that you don't have a serious investigation in cases. How do you expect to avoid mistakes if you don't investigate the facts? And it's bizarre to me that the legal system here depends entirely on the investigation done by the police, who, by the way, one of the great studies we've done in America, and I've sued the cops a lot, it's a great cops, and you get the psychiatric records when you do that. And this is not me speaking, right? How many people here want to be cops? Put your hand up. Oh, come on. What a bunch of individuals. Anyway, you know, interestingly, you people who don't want to be cops probably should be cops, because if you're trying to establish a process where you avoid mistakes, you want people who have this nilly-little approach to the world that you not have. Instead of the people who apply to become cops, and generally do become cops, who are, according to the psychiatric evaluations, not me saying it, have the authoritarian personality, which means that they believe the system works all the time. The very last people you want to be in a position of judging people. I had 2 cops come to my house in Dorset recently, not to arrest me, this was because they were arrest jacks for torture. And I thought I'd make them a footnote in my book, and I said, look, you guys have 54 years of experience in the Metropolitan Police between you. How many times do you think maybe possible? You got it wrong, and you got the wrong person. Didn't pause for breath. Oh, never. And I said, all right, well, I've heard of papal infallibility, but police infallibility is a new thing. You have to be kidding me. They really believe that. That's a real problem in your judicial process when you have people in positions of power doing that. They're not bad people, they're just wrong. Finally, I mean, there are hundreds of things I'd like to say about positive things about the American system that you should copy. But one is this, and I'm not agreeing with David Cameron, which is but you know, charities. I don't approve of this absurd notion that we should have a big society taking over the role of government. The government has a role. But what I don't understand is why those sociopathic lawyers that we do agree on, I'm sure we can agree on everything, I'm not going to time with them. Why are law firms in this country not charities? We have more legal charities in New Orleans than the whole of this country. And I don't understand why lawyers are not doing this for the right reasons, which is to represent people because it's a privilege to represent people who need the help as opposed to always whinging about money. So there are many, many aspects of the American system that are frankly awful, and whatever story they come up with, criticizing the British legal system, I'm going to sneer and tell a story about Mississippi. But on the other hand, there are really, really important and powerful things that we do in the US, which we need to learn positive.
Right, little panel, you've had your figures of whatever. Would you like to pick up anything that any of you have?
I'd like to pick up on positives. And one of the things that's around the moment is a campaign by the Herald League about sex in prisons. It's not about, well, I think conjugal rights is in there, but the Americans have the Rape in Prison Elimination Act. And when I first heard of this, I said, well, one would kind of hope that it was kind of just generally against the law anyway. Why do you need an act for it? But this was Bush, 2003, and what he acknowledged is something that we dare not talk about in this country, is what level of sexual assault goes on in prison. 25 years in prison. I know of no more than 1 or 2 allegations. I know of no prosecutions. Has it not happened? Has there not been rape in prison? Well, of course there are. I mean, in London prisons at the moment, there'd be 2,000 or 3,000 people being locked up with someone they don't know and about whom we know little, and we've made a kind of a risk assessment. But what the Act in America, I think, did was acknowledge, I think there might be an issue here, and there are statistics around as to how many rape, sexual assaults that they make, and it's anything from 5% to 20%. And if you do the math on that in terms of the numbers locked up, it's a lot of people being sexually assaulted. And it's highlighted the issue, it's done what is often not done in this country. We've got a problem here, and we ought to deal with it. Howard League are in their early stages of highlighting these kinds of issues, but it's something we would rather go away. But I suspect it's there, and it's something that we need to talk about, and I suspect a lot of other jurisdictions need to talk about as well.
Here's a proposal for you from Mississippi. Mississippi, where it's a criminal offence to be a prostitute, would bring prostitutes into prison. And that was an official policy until some journalists found out about it and expressed it. I'm not sure that's a solution to anything, but it's just an idea from Mississippi.
Other thoughts are right.
My notion of positives of the United States is less to the sort of, constitutional political body. It's more the cultures of resistance, which are far, far more impressive than they are here. So on a weekly basis, I listen to Law and Disorder Radio, which is Michael Bradley's Centre of Constitutional Rights, or interesting everything from prison writing to what the latest issues are. I was like, why don't we have a radio show like that in Britain? And things like WBAI radio, like in New York, which also covers even democracy now, inviting families, cases like Fahad Hashmi and Tariq Mohammed. I can't imagine that I would be invited in a similar fashion in some mainstream left organisations. And also the generosity of some of the advocates. I mean, I've had a humiliating experience in Britain where I've written to really left-wing intellectuals and people I thought would be naturally on my side, columnists who will remain nameless, but within the United States, people responded immediately. Solitary Watch, who just came over last week, I hosted the first week. They were so generous, they wanted to visit a brother in prison. And there's so many other things I could talk about in that sense. That a wonderful woman called Bonnie Kness, who's like Clive and Dr. Martin. She's she's this amazing Quaker activist who's been supporting black power prisoners from the 60s. She, for example, created a collection of solitary confinement survival guide made of people in solitary confinement for other people in solitary confinement, which is things I gave to my brothers. I was constantly turning towards the American resources in order to sustain my love of prison.
Sharon, you go look at this, the idea that the penal debate is much more vibrant and much more healthy in the United States than it is here, where it seems to be very protected and torn.
No, I don't. I'm having this terrible internal kind of dialogue and talking down. I don't. I think that in many ways, yes, you're right. It is very vibrant. A lot of amazing people, Monica and certainly being one of many that I've met. But somehow, despite all this activism, they managed to be incredibly effective. And I've often wondered why. I think that in many ways, the voluntary organizations in this country, certainly being one of them, managed to achieve much more with less, maybe, public face. I can't quite explain that. I think it might have something to do with class, I don't know, but that's maybe a debate for another time. Sorry. But no, I disagree. And I would also like to take Clive to task and give me one positive example of something from the prison system in the United States.
Well, that's quite a hard one. I just approved the prison full stop, so I don't have a lot of time to say anything positive about it. And I'm not going to say anything positive about prison in America. I think it's a whole lot better here.
I think the way to put this into perspective is if we look at liberty in this country and there's a sister organization in the United States, which is the American Civil Liberties Union. I think the American Civil Liberties Union far more radical to have branches in every state. I'd like, Liberty is a London-centric organisation. American Civil Liberties Union even wrote a third-party intervention and loads of my brother's European case, whereas Liberty remained completely nowhere to see. And that was a good way to see how what their cultural system is far more impressive than
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with that. I think lots of the pressure groups on this tend to speak only to the converted and don't understand that the way to win the battle is to convert the unconverted. And I think that's been a real problem in this country. The lack of understanding of how to work with the program has been about that. I'll throw in two other things I think we've learned from America. One of them is innovation. There's an incredible range of innovation in the American system. I went we have a drug called miracles, but when you see how far they've spread there, they're incredible to see. I went into one where there's a big Republican guy, judge. I met him back and there were all the holes he'd shot and everything. It's complete cliches. And he walks into the drug court, there's 40 people lined up to see him, and he looks at them and he says, right, you might all think I'm a motherfucker, but I'm the motherfucker who put you away, so you better play ball with me. And I thought, wow, you're doing that in court over here. And then he proceeded to give them a really tough love, but it was fantastic.
The judge is talking to sir.
But, it's fantastic, this system there. And, there are so many of these ideas being tried, and I think that is a good thing. I think we do have some innovation here, but I think there's far more innovation there. And that's how you're beginning to see quite interesting things happening. The other thing I thought was really impressive is the probation service. Now, that may just be information that I happened to see and I got lucky, but it was incredibly scientific. It wasn't just sort of gut feeling as to whether he's wrong or correct or not. It was incredibly scientific, it was evidence-based. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant, actually. And I thought it compared very favourably with the probation services that I've seen here, which is tiny. Others may pick me up and tell me that overall the probation service is brilliant and it's going to be screwed up by privatisation. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but certainly I think the American ones that I saw were impressive.
We have an answer very much. Sorry, John, I got a name. It's been a long day. We have an answer. We have a chance for you to ask any questions you like. I've already invited some audience participation to reveal who exactly was sitting on the first Vicky Prize jury. So if you've got any questions to ask, somebody will come around with a microphone.
I'm just going to pick up the voting rights.
Education, housing, employment rights, and take part in fair and equal and just societies, or does it just mean that we've got cheaper spending on prisons? They're very separate issues. And then it led me to think about your comment, Clive, about I didn't vote because I think it's a wrong question. How sure do you have to be before you shoot someone because you think they're carrying a gun? How sure do you have to be before you stop and search a young man in the street because you think he might have been involved in a robbery? Reasonable doubt isn't about proving certainty of crime. They're separate. And if it was, my final thing that I think ties all beautifully together is about the fact that corporate criminals, if we're talking about evidence-based systems, corporate crime probably has quite a large evidence base to suggest that we could almost entirely invert the whole prison population overnight. Discuss.
It's going to solve the ills of society, it's not going to reduce inequality. What it does do is it keeps some people out of prison and it gives them a chance. Instead of locking them up for 10, 15, 20 years, it does give them a chance, and they do work pretty hard to get them into jobs, to support them in the community, to get them housing, to sort out any family issues, etc. So for a small number of individuals whose lives would otherwise be screwed and quite probably didn't have much of a chance in life anyway due to their background, it does give them something different. And I think that is something that should be cherished. And the bigger picture, I think, is the politics of it. That it's taken a very toxic political debate like here, where everyone says the only way to win elections is to shout loudest and shout hardest and toughest and to look all tough on crime. And they've actually said, well, there's nothing tough on crime about locking up the same people again and again and again and doing nothing to cure their problems or to solve them or to help them or to get them into jobs or whatever. What's tough and what's smart is to actually get them off drugs if that's a problem, to solve their mental health issues if you can, to help them with jobs. And I think that's the real difference, and that's why I find it such an interesting thing, because of the obvious crossover here, where we have that same toxic political debate.
I want to answer Ian's question first, which is I've practiced law in Texas a whole lot, and it's a nightmare. And I don't think he and I would disagree when we say that one of the reasons, when he says that one of the reasons that there are positive evolution is they got a long way to go. And it's an awful process, and it's a hate-filled process, and we have a long way to go before we get anywhere close to a sensible one. That said, he's totally right that we should look for allies where we find them, and also the left wing is incredibly naive in this country, as it is in America, although there's not one really, about speaking the language of the right wing. And the right wing stole our language very effectively, and they're really good at it, but the left wing is pathetic when it comes to trying to do justice in a left-wing sense, using the right language. And we do need to be able to talk to the people who are Republicans. And, you know, look, some of the Tories here were the best people on torture on the cases I would do in Guantanamo. Andrew Tyree, who's, you know, not a flaming socialist, was by far the most effective person. It's really hard to find a Labour Party member who's anywhere like as good now, even though they're in opposition. That's the first thing. The second thing, it's about judging people, isn't it? What I find astounding about the world in general is when I give talks, or rants as I prefer to call them, about the book I've just published, which is about Chris Maharaj, who was on death row in Florida for years, 74 years old, British, patently innocent. What I always do at the beginning is I tell everyone he's innocent, and then I tell them the facts the jury heard, and ask the people in the audience how many here would vote guilty. 98% of them vote guilty, even though I've told them he's innocent. So what's fascinating to me is that we're willing to make these judgments where we're patently wrong from the beginning. And what that reflects to me is a harshness of judgment, period. I don't really know what you mean about shooting people on the street. I don't think we use a beyond a reasonable doubt standard there. On the other hand, I'd want us to use a pretty damn high standard before we shot people, because I've watched people being shot by an American police force when I was an intern in Los Angeles, and they didn't need to do it. And I don't know what the hell their standard was, but they didn't need to kill the guy. So I think we use a standard for judging people. On the left, we're just as bad. We want to treat right-wing people in the same absurd, harsh, prejudiced way that we criticize them for treating our clients. And I think that's terribly, terribly wrong, frankly, and stupid.